I am so thrilled to start this new year with an event with the Hastings Library, which, even though I'm just up the river from Hastings, I adore for many, many reasons. And to have this wonderful partnership with Book Yaya, I am honored that we have two amazing writers this afternoon. Peace Ahomede, who is a scholar and a writer. She's a senior. Peace, do you want to correct the pronunciation of your name? Did I just screw it up horribly?
It's Peace, Ajo Midye.
Thank you, thank you. I in particular am very sensitive to that, and I'm very sorry I didn't say it correctly. Peace is a scholar and writer. She is senior lecturer in gender and international politics at the University of Bristol, England. Her book, Global Norms and Local Action, The Campaigns to End Violence Against Women in Africa, was published in 2020 by Oxford University Press. Her debut novel, His Only Wife, was published in September 2020 by Algonquin Books and was the October pick for Reese's Book Club. It was a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, a New York Times Notable Book of 2020, and a Time Magazine Must-Read Book of 2020, including lots of other great picks. If you haven't read it yet, grab it as soon as possible. Maya Shanbog Lang is the author of What We Carry, which was named a New York Times Editor's Pick, an Amazon Best Memoir of 2020, and a Best of 2020 by Bustle, Parade, Times of India, and others. She is also the author of The 16th of June, a novel that pays tribute to James Joyce's Ulysses in a gorgeous debut novel. Winner of the Neil Shepard Prize in Fiction, she holds a PhD in comparative literature and lives with her daughter in Hastings. Please help me welcome Peace and Maya in a discussion about Peace's new novel.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Delane, for that beautiful introduction. And I just want to say thank you to Spoken Interludes, Book Yaya, Delane, and Dan. You guys do such wonderful work. And the Hastings Public Library, thank you for sponsoring this and for everything that you do. I live a block and a half from you, and what would this town be without you? I'm in there all the time. It is such a pleasure and a privilege today, Peace, to talk with you about your beautiful, dazzling debut novel. It brought to mind for me my favorite line from Toni Morrison, which is that true adulthood is a difficult beauty and an intensely hard-won glory. And your novel really gets into that hard-won glory of adulthood for a woman in particular. I wanted to start off by asking you, one thing I'm so curious about as a writer when I talk to fellow writers, and particularly, you with your background in scholarship, you're a scholar of gender studies and international politics. You've written fiction before in the form of short stories. This is your first novel. I love hearing writers talk about the kind of leap of faith involved with starting a novel. I was curious, did you have this book in mind for a while? Was it sort of percolating and germinating, or did it just come to you? And what was that process like?
Thank you, Maya, for that excellent question. And thank you so much for joining me today, and Delane and Dan and Debbie and the Hastings Library and everyone who's here. Thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be speaking with you. And yeah, so I'm a scholar, but I also write fiction. But I like to tell people that I began writing fiction long before I started doing social science research. So when I was about 10, I think that's when I started writing fiction. And I started because I ran out of books to read. I just read books so quickly that the local library couldn't keep up with me. And my school library couldn't keep up with me. So I just like, you know what, I'm going to write my own books. So that is how I got into writing. So even when I went into academia, I just continued writing fiction because I loved it. And this book, I started thinking about it when I was working on my PhD dissertation. I was in Boston at the time, at Boston College. And I had this tiny studio apartment with a window that faced a brick wall. And I'll wake up every day, sit at my desk facing this brick wall and try to write my dissertation. And it's during this time that I started thinking about the book, about the character of Afi, in the book. And I should just, I'm not sure if everyone has read the book, so I will just very quickly summarize what it's about. It's a story, and it's set in Ghana, about a young woman called Afi, who finds herself in an arranged marriage, arranged by a woman called Auntie, a very wealthy woman, who's arranged this marriage between Afi and her son Ellie, because she does not approve of Ellie's partner. So Afi, this young woman, then has this task of winning back Ellie for his family. But more importantly, I think it's a book, Maya, as you said, about someone finding their voice and coming into their own. So I began thinking about this around 2010, when I was like writing my PhD dissertation. But it wasn't until early 2013 that I actually began writing, like putting words on paper.
This is so funny. It's kind of uncanny. I wrote my first book while in a tiny New York City apartment that happened to be facing a brick wall. And I too was writing my dissertation and sort of feeling up against a wall. And so maybe there's something about the pressure of that and the circumstances of that make the escape of fiction necessary. I'm curious, during the time those 3 years when you were thinking about the book, were the characters, did you do backstory writing? Did you write things experimentally to see how it felt? Or I've talked to certain writers who just kind of take their characters out on walks and think about their characters before actually committing to trying out writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't necessarily do backstories, as in writing backstories. What I do is I just spend so much time in my head just thinking about these characters. And so for this book, it was like 3 years of me just sitting at my desk, walking around and developing the character. And I should say that the character of Afi started off as very different. She started off as a university graduate. And over the years, she became a seamstress. And that tends to happen with my writing, where as I go along, things just change. So that is how I developed the characters. And I think I tried writing a couple of short stories on the main character. And that was also a way in which I was able to develop it a bit more and develop the plot of the book. But a lot of my writing happens in my head, and so I wrote the book mainly when I was in Ghana. And I love being in Ghana because in Ghana I live out in the country, and I just go on these really long walks where I just think about the book and the plot and the characters for hours and hours. So that's how like everything comes to life in my mind.
I love that. I remember reading about Wordsworth going on these long walks and coming home with his pockets full of scraps of paper, because he would walk for miles and miles and then similarly work things out while walking. So your novel opens on the day of Afi's, and please correct me if I missed, I listened to an interview you had done with someone else because I so desperately wanted to pronounce your characters' names correctly. So it's Afi.
Yeah, it's Afi. Yeah.
Afi. The book opens on her wedding day, very memorably, with this wonderful first sentence: Elikim married me in absentia. He did not come to our wedding. I loved this as an opening line because this premise of Ellie's whereabouts, whether he's present or absent, physically, emotionally, his whereabouts and his availability come to govern so much of Afi's world. Did you always know you were going to start the novel at this point in time on her wedding day, because this is such a pivotal day in her life as a young woman, or did it previously start elsewhere?
The very first, and actually when I was first writing, I didn't really keep good track of my work. I don't know how it is with you, but I didn't like keep early drafts. So I had to like go through my email, because back in the day, I would email everything to myself so I wouldn't lose documents, to try and find the first draft of the story. And when I did the earliest draft I found, it was very different, and it didn't start with the wedding. But by the time I was seriously writing, I knew that I wanted to start with the wedding, but also that first line, because I wanted the reader to know that this isn't a conventional romance novel. You know, it's not a happily ever after kind of book. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs. It's going to be quite an unusual marriage. And I didn't want the reader to be surprised. So I just wanted to put it out there. And the wedding, I think the wedding is so very important. And his absence at the wedding just speaks volumes. And so I've had people ask me, well, is it normal that people are not at their weddings in Ghana, traditional weddings? And it does happen with a few traditional weddings that either the man will be absent or the woman will be absent. And this tends to happen usually when they live in different countries. So maybe it's difficult to travel, maybe there are immigration issues that prevents them from traveling. So you would have a stand-in at the wedding. And in fact, there are some cases where both the bride and the groom are not at the wedding, and there are stand-ins for both of them. So it's not unusual. But what is unusual is a man not showing up to his wedding because he's on a business trip. Now that is unusual.
Right. And we get her anxiety about that. One of the things I love about Afi is that she knows certain things and we feel her process them, right? So even on her wedding day, she thinks, well, it has happened before that someone is not able to make their wedding because of circumstances, but he's on a business trip and this is someone who does have the means to be present. So it's more of a choice for him to not be present on some level.
Yes.
So we really get to to feel that play out and sort of echo through the novel as her grappling with his presence and absence and the choices he's making. One thing I was wondering about is how aware you were of a Western audience and the Western reader while writing this. I loved the way you didn't explain things in in an explanatory way, yet at no point did I feel confused or lost. And I was curious how you negotiated that.
Well, first of all, I think we tend to really underestimate readers. I remember being 10 years old and reading Russian literature and reading literature set in New York where people did things and went to places I'd never been, I'd never seen. And it made sense to my 10-year-old self. And I could follow those stories and I understood them. So I really think sometimes we really underestimate the reader. I feel like a 30-year-old woman who's never been to Ghana can read it. And if 10-year-old me could understand Russian literature, 35-year-old woman somewhere or man is not going to have a problem, reading about Ghana, about things that are not things that they're used to. So I was very aware, I'm not very much in the literary community, as in African fiction community, but I do read quite a bit of what people say. And I know that there's even before I started writing, I knew there was an interesting conversation about the tendency to explain when writing when writing with the expectation that you're going to have a Western audience and you need to explain to them. And so I knew that in itself was kind of a very political issue. So I was very wary about it. I did not want to do it because I really trust the reader. I have so much confidence in the reader. And something else for me is that, so I teach and I do academic writing and I do so much explanation in my academic writing and definitions. And I just don't want to bring that to my fiction, right? I don't want to spend my fiction so I've had people say, I learned so much about Ghana from your book. And I'm like, that's great. But I just want you to read this story and love it. I'm really not trying to teach you about Ghana. I'm not trying to write a cultural studies book for you. I just want you to read a book and be entertained and escape into this story. So I think I kind of went around with that, but I hope I got at the question you asked.
You absolutely did. First of all, I love all of your answers, Peace. I really we have a shocking amount in common, as it turns out. And I love that answer. And I think you're so right. I think readers are able to take so many leaps. And God knows, growing up, yes, it's like when we read Shakespeare, when we read whoever it is, and we have to go back into past centuries to understand, we do that. So why should, just because a minority is writing, why should the expectations be different? Oh, the reader requires scaffolding or help or guidance, because no, readers can make these intuitive and imaginative leaps. I think that's so exactly right. I was really struck by Afi's voice, and I felt throughout as I was reading this novel that I knew her, and that even when she was confused about something or torn about something, I felt that she had a real clarity of knowing deep down, even if she didn't know what to do, she knew how she felt internally. And she was sort of tuned into her own compass.
Yes.
I'm really curious if during the drafting process, you ever imagined, you said before that she wasn't immediately a fashion designer or seamstress. So that's super interesting to me because I was going to ask you about that. I'm wondering, did you ever have other outcomes for her in mind?
Oh, yes.
Yes, you did.
Yes. I mean, so when I love writing about characters that are not like me. I find it so much more fun. And so as I was writing, I kept reminding myself, you don't want someone who thinks like you. So a lot of what Afi does in the book is just things that I would not approve of, some of what she does. And there are points where I'm thinking, oh no, Afi, don't do this. It's a terrible decision, but I'm not going to live your life for you. So if that's what you want to do. So for me, it was just thinking about someone who was very different from me and really trying to get into the head of that person and construct their thoughts. And I did have a different ending in mind for the book. I had a different ending in mind for the book. But as the character developed, and I mean, I'd love to hear about your experience as well. Because as the character developed, the ending that I had planned just seemed out of character for her. And it just like Afi just grabbed the hold of the story and just ran away with it. And I couldn't force her towards my ending. And so it's almost like Afi wrote her own ending for herself. But that's just how my writing goes. I always start thinking I know exactly what's going to happen, and I start writing, and then just things just go in a different direction. But I'd love to hear about like you in your writing. Is it do you have like a similar experience, or are you one of those people who just you plan it and it just works out perfectly as you planned it?
Oh God, no. I wish I were that person because my life would be so much easier and it would be so much more efficient. But no, I always think of that E.L. Doctorow line that writing is like driving at night in the fog, and you can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole journey that way. So I always feel like I'm writing blind and I have no idea where the thing is going. But I like that, and similarly to you, I find my characters uncooperative. I love this idea, though, that for you, you kind of were not the auntie, where instead of like imposing a fate on Afi and making her do something, you listen to her and you let her guide the story.
I'm going to jump in. Do you mind, Maya, if I jump in real quick? Because we got 3 really great questions from the attendees, and I feel like they are dovetailing with what y'all have been talking about. So I don't want to move too far downstream before we let the attendees ask. Is that okay with y'all? And then y'all can, okay. Thank you. A great question from Maggie Goldstein. Maggie, do you want to ask it yourself or shall I? I'll go ahead. Okay. Peace. If your book is just for the reader to be entertained and not learn about Ghana, could the story have taken place someplace else? And then I have 2 more questions after this from people.
I think it's kind of a universal story, honestly. At the core, at the heart, it's a story about a woman living under pressure and having to make a difficult decision or difficult decisions. And I feel like women everywhere, people everywhere are dealing with this. So I think in that way, it's a very, for people who are not Ghanaian, I think that it's a story that can occur anywhere. But for me, so when I began writing this book, I had never read a book set in my hometown before. Maybe I should have said this earlier. Really, when I was writing this book, I had a Ghanaian reader in mind. And I had like people who grew up in my hometown in mind. Because like I had lived up until my 30s, and I hadn't read a single book set in my hometown before. And I thought everyone deserves to read a book about where they grew up. Right. And so it's really so when I was writing, I kept thinking, what are people in Ghana going to say when they read this book? So yes, this is a story that could have occurred anywhere, but at the same time, people in Ho don't have many stories about where they grew up. So in that way, I hope it will be special to people in my hometown, in Ghana, and in Ghana more broadly.
That's beautiful. Can I jump in and follow up with that and say, because I imagine we're all thinking the same thing. So what was the reception from your hometown? I can only imagine it was what you intended, that they were thrilled to find themselves talked about and able to see themselves in this way. Can you speak quick, however long about that? And then I'll have two more questions, and Maya, you can proceed after that. Thank you.
The response has been great. So the book was published in the US in September, but was published in Ghana last week. And it's just been really nice reading people's responses. And even before, like friends who were able to get it, or Ghanaians who were able to get it in the US, there was a really nice comment that someone made. They were like, Peace wrote a book for us. And it just made me so very happy that people felt like this was their book, and people were just so happy to see themselves and to see familiar places and names in the book. And it's something that's very interesting when I've spoken to non-Ghanaians, or I guess to an extent non-Africans, I have people say, this is so bizarre. This is such a strange story. Someone absent from their wedding, and this decision and that decision. It's been so interesting when people from Ghana read and they're like, oh my goodness, this is so familiar. I feel like this has happened before. I mean, the difference in which people engage with the book and receive the book, it's just been so, I'm just enjoying it. It's ongoing, and I'm enjoying it.
That's beautiful. That's it. And I think it speaks to what a life a book has. You create it, you set it forth in the world, and it takes on its own life, and it has its own relationships with people, and then you as its mother get to watch that and enjoy it as it goes on and affects so many lives. That's really beautiful. So happy that question came up so that you could share that with us. A question from Esther Brumberg. Esther, do you want to ask, or shall I speak for you? Okay, I will jump in. I was intrigued by Auntie threatening Ellie that he couldn't go to her funeral if he didn't comply with her wishes. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about what's like the most melodramatic thing that a mother can say. And I think I've heard someone say that before. I think I've heard that threat made somewhere, or maybe I read it, or I don't know. But it just seemed like the kind of thing that a mother who centers herself would say to her child. Yeah. And it's and I should say, funerals are also a big deal in Ghana. Like, funerals are so very important. And so not to be able to attend the funeral of a loved one is something that would hurt.
And would probably be a level of very large public shaming, correct? Not a hurt that would stay within the family, but maybe a hurt that would also be one that he would experience publicly. Is there also that aspect to it, or no? Am I misinterpreting?
There'll definitely be a lot of people who talk, basically.
Right. Yeah. So she's
and in the story, Ellie's a wealthy man, and people don't people tend not to say things to wealthy people's face, to their faces, but people will say things behind his back that he wasn't at his mother's funeral.
Yeah, yeah, very, very effective threat. And from Tom Asher. Tom, would you like to ask a question or all?
Piece. I think
Great.
I don't know if we've actually met in person before, but I think we've maybe even been in correspondence in a different world you inhabit. And I'm curious about that. So as a social scientist, what do you write about that you can't write about as a novelist, and vice versa? I think probably more the latter. What is it that you can write about as a novelist that you're not able to do in your scholarly career?
I don't think there's anything I'm not able to write about. I think it's just the way in which I approach it. So this book is very much about issues that I teach in the classroom. It's about issues of gender and power and class and, the obligations and the pressures we put on young women. And these are things that I talk about in my scholarship, that I talk about in the classroom, but always using very academic terms and theories and concepts. And I'm then able to speak about them in a very different way. And I remember when I was writing, I kept reminding myself, you are not teaching. Don't try to explain. Don't try to force feminism onto Afi. So what I really would like to do with my fiction is really talk about the things that I talk about in my research, but talk about them in very different way. And then, of course, reaching a much larger audience. I think that more people will read this book than would read my academic book that took me like 10 years to write. And that's just the reality of it.
Dana Alongi has a question. Dana, do you want to ask the question?
Sure. And my apologies that my camera isn't on. It's not working today. But I actually recently read your book, and I very thoroughly enjoyed it. I found this incredible transformation of character in Afi. She started off sort of questioning herself, I think. And in the end, she had such a strength of character. And I really admired her. And my question is, did you always intend for that kind of journey in her character, for her to kind of really transform by the end of the novel?
Yes, I wanted it to be that transformation. Because I think that's that makes for a more interesting story. And as a reader, I really like to be entertained as a reader. And I like to, read a book and just escape into it for however long I'm reading it. So I wanted this transformation to happen. I wanted it to be interesting. I wanted the reader to be drawn into Afi's story. I just wasn't entirely sure how it would happen. I had an idea, and it's really when I began writing that a lot of the story developed. But yes, I wanted it to be a journey of self-growth and development for the main character.
I just want to tag on to that and say one thing I really loved about this novel. Sometimes I think authors try and show evolution or transformation in a character, and it almost feels, like they overshoot. We can't buy certain moves. And here it felt so organic, and it felt to me like Afi's transformation and growth was so true to her. It felt very natural, and it felt as though the seeds of it were there all along. So we were on the journey with her. One thing I wanted to ask you about is, so much of this novel has to do with those expectations that we put on women. And as you said, we often think about these ideas about gender and gender expectations and what we expect of young women. Part of what I loved is the complicated roles of other women in this novel, like Auntie, who is this fierce matriarch. And we think about, the expectations of men and husbands and what happens when we get married and all of that. But it's Auntie who's pulling the strings. And she's the one who's manipulating everyone and sort of using Afi as a chess piece to achieve her goals. And then we have someone like Evelyn, her neighbor, Afi's neighbor, who is this voice of warning and also a voice of wisdom. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about these women in Afi's life and how women play a part in these pressures and expectations as we see them play out.
Well, I really wanted there to be different kinds of women in the story, because that's life, right? They're just people are different, and the different their characters and how they approach things. And I wanted to show that. I also wanted to show women from different socioeconomic classes, because that also reflects reality and the different paths to which people get to their various socioeconomic status. So those are things that I had in mind as I was kind of building, like developing this story. And I should say, so Evelyn, like you're right, is Afi's neighbor, and Evelyn is my favorite character in the book. And I always feel guilty when I say this, because I feel like Afi should be my favorite character, but she isn't. And Evelyn is my favorite character because I think secretly I want to be like her. She doesn't follow the rules. She does what she wants. And I think that really is the way that I think we should encourage women to live. Young women should feel that, you know, they are free to live like that, to make their own decisions and to create their own paths in life. But I just really wanted to kind of create this story with women from different backgrounds and different experiences. And they all serve an important purpose in that I think they help to move the story forward. Because each of these women, in some way, it's either putting pressure on Afi or pulling her in one direction or the other, but they're all also very important to her growth as a person. Like, because Evelyn, for example, is a character that is constantly reminding Afi that there are other ways of being a wife, that doesn't just, you know, it's not limited to you just being submissive and following the rules all the time. There are other ways of being in a relationship. And so all of these characters are important in that they help to drive the story forward. And they also help Afi grow as a character. Yes, Auntie, one could say, is making Afi's life very difficult, but she also then is someone that Afi has to stand up to eventually. And that in itself allows for some development.
Yeah, one thing I also wanted to say is that, you know, one thing that really sort of touched me and kind of moved me was when we see Afi's relationship with her mother change. Her mother has always been someone she could turn to. They had such this lovely dynamic between them. And the minute the arranged marriage comes about, that changes their dynamic and it puts a different kind of pressure and strain on their relationships. I loved how you negotiated that and brought that into the novel. I will say, when Evelyn says to Afi, "You are the strong one," because, you know, Evelyn with Richard, she tells herself, I'm not delusional. I get that Richard will never marry me. And she says, to be with someone and not get what you want from them. I thought, you know, Afi might be the stronger one. So I put that out there for Team Afi. I see that there's a couple of questions from the audience. I just want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask you.
Yes, thank you, Maya. So I'm going to pin Peace, and then we have a few questions. Robin, do you want to ask your questions? It's such a great one, or do you want me to ask it for you?
Sure, no, I'd love to.
Great, thanks, Robin.
Trying to word it. So, Peace, I finished your book yesterday. I think it took me 2 days. And I had to keep saying, I got to get up and like do some exercise, but I was, you know, really enjoying it. It was so readable. And Maya, I started yours 2 days ago listening, and then I switched over to reading, and I'm like almost halfway through it and loving it as well. And I wanted to ask because Uncle Pius in Peace's book reminds me of Maya's father in real life. And I wanted to ask Peace if there are many, you know, if the patriarchal system of Ghana and maybe other, you know, African countries, if there are many men like that. Did you know anybody in your family like that? And then for Maya, did you see any of your father maybe in Pius as, you know, it just struck me the whole, I mean, you've got the whole thing with your mother as well in the book. But I really was struck by the father, and Pius calls himself Afi's father, even though he's just the uncle. But I wanted to, ask you about your feelings on those two, you know, one real character and one fictional.
Oh, great. So Peace, will you answer first, and then Maya, you can jump in. Thank you so much for those, Robin.
Okay. Well, so Uncle Pius I didn't like model him after anyone. I think he's just an amalgamation. And I've lived in so many places across the world, and you just meet a lot of men who exhibit the worst when it comes to masculinity. And I feel like Uncle Pius is just a collection of a lot of the horrible things that I've seen throughout my life. The sense of entitlement, this feeling that they should be able to tell people what to do, that they don't have to follow the rules, but everyone else has to follow the rule. So I think, well, Uncle Pius is Ghanaian, but I think that wherever you go, you're going to meet men like that, right? Who just embody the patriarchy and just love to lord it over everyone and think that they are right and their voices should be heard. And so, I think Uncle Pius is just all of the negatives, or many of the negatives that I've seen in men that I brought together into this one character.
I love, by the way, that you named him Uncle Pius. The dramatic irony of that is just priceless, because that's how he thinks of himself, certainly. And I also think your answer echoes so beautifully what you said at the outset, that I think your story is a universal one, and that it happens to be through the lens of your hometown in Ghana, but that women everywhere will identify with these circumstances and with these pressures and with, you know, the grappling of that. Anyway, Robin, thank you so much for saying that and for this question. It's so funny because the minute I read Uncle Pius, I thought, oh, I know him. I just know exactly who this is. And I never made the connection myself, but you're totally right. That is absolutely my father, 100%, who was controlling and narcissistic and expected our entire household and really everyone he encountered to bow to him and follow his rules and please him without him having to do anything in exchange or anything in return, and never had the ability to examine his own behavior or his own choices or how he made others feel. And I think really in some way just lacked empathy as a human quality. And when you have someone who operates that way and has that disposition, it's sort of like a tornado in that it disrupts so much and causes so much upheaval and causes so much stress, but is utterly unaware of its own disruptions. So thank you for making that connection between our books.
Thank you, Robin. That was really beautiful. What a lovely, unexpected addition to this program that you brought that up. Susan Wolfert has a great question for Peace. Susan is interested to know, Peace, how you decide upon the title of the book. She says you're defining Afi as the wife, not as her own person. So she would love to hear you talk about that.
Well, no, that's a great question. I'm terrible with titles. But I just finished my second manuscript and I came up with a title and I'm so proud of myself. I don't know if it's going to stick, but I have a title. But so this book, when I submitted it, it was submitted as Afi, and even after we're done with editing, it was still Afi. And they were like, what do you want the title to be? And I did have some ideas, but they weren't the best. And then my editor said, well, in I think the last line of the book where Afi says she wishes she was the only wife. And he suggested this as a title. And I was like, that makes sense in that, because at the end of the book, Afi, I don't want to spoil it for people, but Afi is still yearning. Afi wants to be the only wife, and it's very important to her. And you are right that she's being defined through being a wife and through marriage, but it's also, I wanted to reflect reality. Marriage is very important in Ghana. Marriage is such an important right into adulthood. And so for a lot of women, and it's in somehow this is a criticism of that. There's a lot of pressure on women to get married. And I know it happens everywhere, but I think it's especially so in Ghana. There's a lot of pressure on women to get married. And there's almost this message that you are not complete until you are married. And so it made sense that for Afi, marriage would be important and that she'd want to be a wife. I mean, and this also goes back to my point about not wanting to write the book as if I was Afi, because obviously my approach to life is very different. But I didn't want to force my feminist. I didn't want, the book to end with Afi saying, oh, I condemn marriage and I will be single for life. That would not be realistic for, I mean, that's not to say there are women in Ghana who are I never want to get married. But I think that for a lot of women, marriage is very important because of the society in which they find themselves.
Peace, I absolutely have to ask you, first of all, I have to say, you've already blown my mind by being so prolific and having 2 books come out in 2020, your book of scholarship and this novel. So to know that you now are wrapping up a 3rd manuscript is quite humbling, but also exciting and wonderful. Congratulations. What is the title of this manuscript? And can you tell us a little bit about what it's about?
So it's titled Night Bloom. And I came up with this title because I was watching this Netflix documentary on desert vegetation. And the narrator was talking about these, what do you call these succulents that grow in the desert? Cacti that bloom only at night, because that's when there's a bit of water in the atmosphere and it's a bit cool. I was like, yes, my character blooms under the most hostile conditions. So Night Bloom should be the title of this book. Well, it's a book about friendship, and it's a book about 2 young women who initially were growing up in Ghana. One moves to the US, and it's just about how they start off as really, really close friends and how they come apart over the years. And it's an exploration of how their relationship deteriorates over time. And I wrote this book because as I've gotten older, something that I've noticed is I've lost a lot of friends along the way. And what I've found to be very fascinating is that everyone feels like they've been wronged. So everyone feels like they're the victim, and so who exactly is offending whom? Everyone is upset. And so I'm so really fascinated by that. And so this book is an exploration of friendships coming apart and everyone feeling like they are right and the other person is wrong. So yeah.
I love that. I also think friendship is one of these things that, we get to a certain place in adulthood and we start thinking about how we negotiate adulthood, and we think, wait a minute, that period of my life of high school and college where I had all these people around me and had people in abundance has gone. And how do we negotiate friendships? And how is it that certain friendships fell apart? So I think that's great. This brings me to a final question for you, which is that you are Liberian born, you grew up in Ghana. We see Liberia in this novel a little bit, in the sense that it's what takes Ellie away, and the post-war opportunities there form the basis of his burgeoning career, but also the other woman is from Liberia. So how much do you, I'm not going to ask you if you talk about your, I'm not going to ask the question about how personal is your fiction, but rather like how much do you draw on your experience when writing fiction as a resource? And maybe a related question is like, how much research did you have to do in making Afi a fashion designer? Because like personally, I don't know how to sew 2 stitches. So that would require a lot of research for me. Did you have to do research? Was this something you already knew about?
Well, what's the second part? I didn't have to do research. So I grew up in just like Afi, Uncle Pius's house is this huge compound house where you have tons of relatives. That's exactly how I grew up in Ho. So I live in this house with tons of relatives and some people. My grandmother was a baker and was a farmer, so I can tell you a lot about baking bread. I had cousins who were seamstresses, so I can tell you, I can sew myself, but I've watched people sew enough, and I've been in so many sewing shops, salons, that I can talk about these professions just because I grew up watching people just do these things. So I did not have to do research. I had to just spend time remembering what it was like to be, in a shop where people were being trained how to sew. What I had to do research on was like fashion and what rich people in Ghana wear, because I can't afford what rich people in Ghana wear. So I don't know, what do they wear? Also, I don't go to fancy places in Ghana. So I had to like follow like influencers on Instagram and like just to see the kind of things that fancy people in Ghana wear. And also I had to do research about nightlife and restaurants. Once again, I'm a bit of a homebody. So even when in Ghana, like I don't go to really nice places. I spend all my time at home. So my little sister, who knows the town, took me out to like nightclubs. And there was this part where I was in a nightclub and I was taking notes on my phone about what the people, I'm sure people are like, what is that person doing? She's been typing the whole evening. Like I took notes about everything, even how the nightclub smelled. Because I was like, I don't know, I don't do this enough. So yes, I went to nice restaurants and nightclubs in Ghana to do research on how the other half lives. But your first question about Liberia, I'm not entirely clear about the points you're trying to get at.
Oh, I was just, knowing that was part of your biography and then seeing it in the novel, I thought, oh, that's interesting that she worked that in, because I know certain fiction writers kind of never, it's sort of like, oh, if I've lived it, I'm not going to talk about it in fiction. And then there are other fiction writers who, it makes it a little bit easier if it's something that you've experienced or lived, to bring it into fiction and incorporate it, even if you do it in a different way, because then you don't have to go do all of the research of, what is a nightclub actually like? So I was just curious about your relationship between lived experience and fiction.
For now, I stay away from writing about anything that comes from my life. I'm trying not to draw on my own life. And I think it's partly because I don't want people to ask me questions and I have to answer questions about my own life. I think maybe I'll get to a point where I'm confident enough to do that. But I also just enjoy making things up. And so I think I'm doing more of that now. But so the character Muna is from Liberia, and I was born in Liberia, grew up in Liberia, was there during the early stages of the Civil War, and my family left. But I was quite young. I think I left Liberia when I was like 9 years old. So yeah, I mean, there are things I remember from that time period. But Muna is not. I think Muna, in developing that character, I think I drew more on my research in Liberia, because when my family left during the war, I didn't go back until I was doing my PhD research. so like the descriptions of Liberia and Mona's experience and the difficulties she faces in Liberia comes more from me going back to do my PhD research and seeing what the post-war situation was like. And it's not so much about my personal experiences. Yeah, so I keep going back. I want to I want to write a collection of essays, and I'm like, oh, but I'll have to talk about myself. No. So, I don't know, maybe I'll get to a stage where I feel brave enough to do it.
Well, we will all be waiting. I think I can comfortably say that. Robin has another wonderful question that brings both of your work together, which I think is a beautiful way for us to end this afternoon, with the understanding that if someone else has a question, of course, please chat to me. Robin, would you please speak to Peace and Maya with your wonderful question? Thank you.
Sure. One of the things that struck me in Maya's memoir is that even though her father's an engineer and your mother was a psychiatrist, you grew up in a house without books, and you sought them out obviously at the library or at school, and you found refuge in books. Which is, one of the big memories from my childhood is how much I loved reading. So I was curious because you had, intellectual parents growing up, and it was surprising to me. And I wanted to know what Peace's experience was growing up. Did you have many books in the home, or did you have to seek them out as well? And, how that led to your literary works later.
No, so I didn't have, so I had enough books. I think I just read too much. So there was just, whatever it was just never enough. I had books at home, but I think my parents were not like hardcore readers. Like, we still joke, my dad can take an entire year to read one novel. We still make fun of him about this. So we did have books, but like we didn't have like a library full of books. And I think that is why I got into writing for myself. But I interestingly never thought of writing as a career. And I think even when I published my book, I think my father was, I think, a bit surprised, because I guess he didn't realize that I was writing. And Maya, I thought, like, reading your memoir and about how your father called you a writer, and that didn't happen for me until after I published this book, that I think there was this realization that I was a writer. But anyway, no, so I grew up in a house with books, but just not enough books, I think. Yeah. But I do have a question for Maya. And so I should say, I listened to your memoir on audiobook, and that's like the first book I've listened to on audio before. I had this strange thought that if I listen to it, it's not going to be the same as reading it. But I listened to it, and it's amazing, and your narration it's just sublime. But I was wondering, do you think, what the process of writing fiction versus writing your memoir, is it different getting from like conceptualization stage to actually writing? What are the differences that you saw in this process?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, thank you. That's so kind and generous of you. And I was going to suggest that we have a discussion down the road because I desperately want you to write these essays, which I think would be so powerful and such a necessary and wonderful thing to exist in the world. But yeah, I mean, my short answer is that I really, truly, if you had asked me years ago, I would have bet everything I own that I would never write a memoir. So this was not something I ever expected to do. And it was really just kind of life exerting itself on me, kind of like that brick wall effect that we discussed, where underneath the kind of pressure cooker that my life had become while caring for my mother, I needed to kind of have some sort of outlet. And yeah, the writing experience was so different. And yet, strangely, it did offer me some sense of escape and release, even though I was writing about my circumstances as they unfolded and as I was struggling with them. So it wasn't the kind of escapism of fiction of, oh, I get to kind of catapult myself into this other world and this other universe. But talking about and working through this stuff that I was living, it did help me have a different perspective on it, and it shifted things in me in a way that brought relief. But yeah, the writing process is so different. And I think when you're writing memoir, you can think about and reflect on the writing process and your own kind of writing as it's happening. In fiction, when you write, you want to kind of erase yourself as the author, right? You want the reader to just be like transported in this magic carpet ride kind of way, and you disappear. And when you write memoir, part of it is that you're implicated in the story. And so rather than try and avoid yourself, you have to face yourself. And I think that's both the hard part, but also a rewarding part, is that you kind of get to see yourself grow and change as you write. But thank you, that's very kind. I know that we only have a couple of minutes left. I don't know if other people have more questions. I don't want to rob them of the opportunity to get to talk to you. So if people do have questions, please chime in. And just as Delana, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, there is one comment from Barbara Mahoney, wanted to say, peace, please keep writing. I loved your story. I was drawn in from the first line. And I will express to both of you what I know we are all feeling is you gave us such a beautiful hour, so illuminating and enjoyable. And I would love for everybody to unmute so that we can clap for Peace and Maya and thank them for this beautiful, beautiful hour that we got to spend together on a cold Sunday in January. Happily, thanks to the marvelous technology of Zoom, which we all have a love-hate relationship with, this will be available on YouTube. Book Yaya will have a YouTube channel. I think, Dan, you can jump in and tell me, will it be available maybe in the next couple of days? So please tell your friends if they missed it. It's a great way for them to be introduced to Peace and Maya and their beautiful work. And we feel so grateful that y'all shared your Sunday afternoon with us today. We hope that you will join us for future Book Yaya events with many member libraries here in Westchester. We have some great ones lined up, including Thursday night with Lori Rudiman and Tom Foreman of CNN, Getting Your Life in Order. We all could use that this year. Or me, I can use that this year. And please help me thank Peace and Maya again for a beautiful, beautiful afternoon. And thank you, Hastings Library, for making this possible.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Book Yaya and Dan, Maya, and Peace. And if you haven't read the book, it is a page turner.